Now, just a reminder, we came from this. And we got this. Pretty good, eh? Hey guys, it's Dynamix here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a special treat for you. We're going to dive into XLN Audio's Addictive Drums. We're going to follow two different methods. The first method is one where we take a break, repitch it, chop it up, and then chuck it back into a drum player and do some processing on it. The other process is where we're going to build the kit inside of Addictive Drums, tweak it in there, and then do some processing afterwards. So there's two different methods to show you, and both of them can yield good results. The thing about this particular VST is it is incredible for creating live breaks or just having unique breaks for your tracks rather than regurgitating all of those old classics. Though they're amazing, sometimes we just want to branch out and do something new. So thank you for coming here today. Make sure that you like and subscribe. There's a number of you who have been watching who haven't subscribed. The easiest way you can help me is by subscribing. And of course, make sure you head over to my website, DnBartist.com. Sign up for my email list because I do have some treats on the way in the near future and you don't want to miss out on hearing on that. Okay, so let's get into it. You can use this VST for anything. Like you could be using it for rock, for jazz, for hip hop, funk, whatever. This VST is very, very versatile. But obviously for those of us that work in breakbeat style genres like drum and bass, jungle, etc., this VST allows us to be able to create breaks which can give us that kind of flavor that these genres have predominantly used breakbeats to build, but do it in a new way. So we can grab fresh breaks that we can tweak ourselves, that we can then bring into our own productions. Now, when you open up the VST, you'll see that you've got all these different banks and they're all loaded up. These are all different types of drum kits that you can select from. They're all got different sounds, different vibes. When you're selecting through, you've got different kits that are set up, the presets set up in a certain way. When you're scrolling through, just bear in mind that this play button will change the break, okay? Where if you select a break that you like, which is in the beat section here, you can then select through the different presets while maintaining that break. So just to show you an example. And now we've got a break. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to use this. I think this is going to be a good thing to work with for this example. So the first thing to note is that we've got the beat, alright, which is sitting in here. There's some variations of it as well. So we could hit the play button. And we can select through the different options. So you might think, okay, what break do I want to use? Now this one here, which is the main variation. And then we've got one with ghost notes. And then we've got one which is clean. Now you've got some accenting options, some randomizing options. You've got a range option. The range lets you select through the different types of hits. However, this isn't going to be a deep dive into addictive drums. I'm going to be using this session to show you how I would use it and a couple of different examples. So let's take this ghost notes option, and I'm going to play with the accenting. Now what will be interesting is to change 1/8. Alright, so I'm going to leave it there. Now, you'll notice that the BPM of this break is at 108, whereas inside of Studio One, our tempo is currently set at 172. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the tempo to 108 to match the original break. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this break and drag it into Studio One. Now, make sure you don't have the sync button on, because the sync button syncs to the host DAW. Okay, so whatever your DAW is and whatever tempo you've got, it's going to match. But the other thing is when you're playing the break, it's going to play the break inside of your DAW, and it's going to play the break inside of the plugin. So you can end up with some weird phasing sounds. So just watch out for that. I definitely catch myself out a couple of times when I'm working. All right, so let's take this break. And we can go inside of the kit. Now, the old school way of working with breaks is to take that break and then pitch it up. So simply what we can do is we can bounce this track to audio. Now we've got the break here. And what I might decide to do is just do a little bit of pre-processing. So the first thing I'm going to do is start reaching inside of my plugins, and I'm going to apply some different options. So I'm going to dirty it up with a bit of saturation distortion with Soundtoys Decapitator. Nice. And then the other thing I'm going to look at is a bit of compression. So I'll go down and I'll reach for Fab Filter Pro C. And then I'm going to look at my ratio values. Look at the option types. I'm going to slam it in the beginning. Alright, so I've got a bit of compression which I'm liking the sound of, and now I'm going to start using some EQ. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach for the PugTech EQ here. Okay, so that's sounding good to me. So we'll just do an A/B check. Cool. And then finally, I'll just run a bit of a clipper over this as well. So we'll get the standard clip. You can see we've got some pretty big peaks there. All right, and now we can go and transform this to audio. Sorry, not transform to audio, it's already audio. We're going to render it with all of the plugins that we've just put on there. Okay. And then if we wanted to, we can normalize it. Now, it's obviously going to get quite loud. So I'm going to turn this down on the mixer. Sounding clean. Now, the old school method of working breaks was to pitch them up. So what we can then do is we can grab this and we can send it through to sample one, which is just Studio One's built-in sampler, but obviously whatever DAW you're using, you've got the same method for this. So we'll have our original break here. I'm just going to bring that velocity down, channel volume down. And we can start to pitch it up. All right, so I'm just bringing that up, a fifth. So, quite different. So the next thing to do is we're going to draw in this note. And we're just going to stretch it out over the loop. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to bounce that out to audio. So we'll bring our session back up to the original tempo, 172 BPM. Okay, and then the next thing that we want to do is we're going to take this break and we're going to chop it up. So we open up the audio. Now you could try time this to try and line to the grid, but I'm going to do this just by sight. All right, so our break has all been chopped up into all the different slices. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to highlight this, and depending on what DAW host you're using, the method might be different. However, the approach is still the same. So we want to load these slices up into a drum editor. So inside of Studio One, we've got Impact XT. So we're going to load that, and by selecting all of those, I now have all of my individual slices. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is housekeeping. Okay, so I want to identify where all the kicks are, where all the snares, the ghosts, and the hats are, so that I can route those into different channels. Okay, so we've got our bank here. Now what I've done, selected all the kicks, snares, hi-hats, and ghost notes, and they're all routed to their own channel. So if we go into the mix here and we select our impact, and we can open this folder and we can see all of these here. Okay, so that's going to be kick. This is going to be snare. This is going to be hi-hat. and this is going to be Ghost. Okay, and this will be the break bus. Okay, so we've got everything lined up. Now the next bit of housekeeping, because we've gone through and chopped, you can either be super meticulous when you do this, or you can do it a little bit rougher to just get it done quite quickly. It's up to you. But you'll notice that some of the hits there have actually got some clicks and stuff. So we need to go through and fix that. A bit of a click on that. Fine. Same on that one, needs to be fixed. Click there. Now the next part in this process we're going to go through is we need to tidy up some of the bottom end that's sitting in the hits, particularly around the snare, the hi-hat and the ghost, because there's a lot of bottom end boom that's coming through from the room and the kick. So in order to get this break sounding really tight, we want to clean that up. Now, depending on what DAW you're using, what your drum programmer is that you're loading this through, the approach might be different. So first thing is, if you're following this process where you're loading them into separate channels, you'd grab an EQ and run a high cut. Inside of XT, I can actually do this just by using the filter. So what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll select our snares. And I'm just selecting that by using Command on Mac to be able to multi-select. And then I'll turn on the filter. We want to select a high pass filter. And then we can just slide it back. Just choose a different type, use a ladder. Don't want to cut too much meat. And we'll just run the cutoff here at 100 Hertz. Inside of here in the Impact XT, I can also add some drive if I wanted to. Cool. So we're going to go through and clean these all up. Now, what I can do is I can go ahead and delete these breaks that I've cut up, because I don't need them anymore. So we'll remove those. And we're now left with this. So we're going to start working this, and the first thing I want to do is just write a break. Okay, so we're going to go through, start experimenting and come up with a break that sounds good. Let's go for this one. Alright, so now we want to go to the mixer and I want to start doing some work on this. So the first thing I'm going to do is start rolling with this kick. Okay, so we'll beef it up with Voice of God. Alright, and then I want to reach for some compression. We'll use the Smart Comp. Drums, kick. Okay, EQ. Cool. All right, and then we'll move on to our snare. So I'm going to grab an EQ straight off the bat. Now, we can reach for some distortion. And I'm going to put that in front of the EQ. And then I want to add some transient shaping to this. And let's use the kilohertz transient shaper. Sounding good so far. Now we're going to start working these hats. So if we're listening to it, I just want a bit more clarity coming through, and I can achieve this with pretty much any kind of distortion or saturation. So I'm going to reach into the bag down into the SSL plugins, and then there's a plugin I've got here, which is just this X saturator. And then we wanted to go through and just make sure we don't have any low end being introduced by the saturation. Okay, and then we want to go through into our ghost note as well. Okay, great. So we're starting to make some progress here. All right, so we want to go to our main drum bus. Nothing too crazy. And then we'll go to our clipper. That should give us back some headroom, and then we can do some final EQing. So what I'll reach for, actually, we dip into the world of SSL, and we will grab this channel strip. Get some sizzle in there. And then we'll go down into the low mids. And then if we wanted to, we can see if there's some bottom end to grab out of the break too. So I'm going to select the bell curve. Sounding nice. As you can see, we've come a long way since we worked from this break right here. Drum and bass enthusiasts, eat your heart out. Okay, the final thing that I want to do here is I want to add on some room to this. So I'm going to create an effects channel or an auxiliary send. I'm going to call this drum room. Okay, and then I'm going to reach into the SSL Flexi Verb. I've just started using this a lot. I really like it. And there's a great preset in here called Rooms and Drum Room. Okay, so what we can then do is we can, I'll just unsolo this, we can hear this on its own. So we want to tighten up that time. Just make it really tight, and then we're going to put the wet all the way up. Sounds a bit weird, but then what we're going to do is we're going to blend this in with the drum kit. Sounding good. So if we come back to our drum pattern, you can see obviously inside we've just got the exact same break. And when you're working a MIDI like this, you might prefer to bounce this break out into audio, or you can just work within the MIDI. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a chop. We're going to make a chop after the first snare, and then we're going to make a chop before the next kick, and then we're just going to chop off these two here. And then simply what we can do is we can start to rearrange this. So I'm going to delay the snare, okay? And then I'm going to bring the last part of it forward. And then we end up with this. All right, so that's going to act as a really good switch up from our main theme. So that can kind of act as a phrasing. So we can then bring this forward. If we bring the loop out and start to expand the loop. All right. Cool. So we start to create some interest into our drums straight away. So we'll chop this up again. We'll make a new pattern. So we'll take this and then we're going to chop slightly differently. So again, we'll chop after that first snare, and then we're going to chop again before that first kick. All right, and then we'll take those tails off. Okay, and then we can play around with repeating patterns. So we could go from here, take that shuffle, repeat that shuffle twice, and then we can finish with a snare hit. All right, so they've got a nice little variation there. So as you can see, you can start to create some phrasing in your drums quite quickly. There you go, you're making drum and bass, man. And that's all from using Addictive Drums. That's not some loop or break that I grabbed from a sample pack or reworked from some other tune that's been used 1,000 times. That's me literally grabbing this amazing VST and then just doing some old school techniques, but in a modern way. Now, if you wanted to, you could also go do some expansion to this. So you might decide that you want to layer like another kick or snare with this. If you find that kick, maybe you want to chuck something a bit more synthetic underneath. So what we can do is we can look at that and see what that actually sounds like. So what I've done is I've used kick 2 to analyze the kick of the break and look at the sweeping frequencies of it to match up as best as possible to complement the break. So we've now got our original kick drum, which was this one here. I'm just going to bring this low pass filter back up again because I use that to isolate down in the lower region. So we've got the kick, and this is with the layer. So what I'd then do is I'd grab that and I would bounce that to a new track. and I'd call this kick layer. And now I can go into my drum editor, I can grab that kick layer and I can drop it into there. And then that's going to come out here, channel 5. All right. And I can just do some filtering to this because I don't necessarily need any tops. Okay. And that's just going to tuck underneath, and there we've got the kick pattern all laid out for it. So we can hear what this actually sounds like now layered up with the break. And then we can do the same thing with a layered snare. So really easy, because we labeled everything inside of Impact, we can actually see what the hits are called. So all I'm going to do is run in here and grab out everything that isn't a snare. So now that we've isolated the snare hits, we can just move these up until we get to the new location for where the new snare drum is, which will be just next to our kick. Gone a little bit far. And there it is. Okay, and then I just do the same thing with this one. And then I can just move that up to the same position. And now I've got all my snares lined up. Okay, so when I get this, I can then look at the same snare layer that I've got in there, and again I can just tune it in. I can use an analyzer like Vision 4X, I could use Paz, or I can use my ears as well. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to solo the snare drum from the break, and I'm going to solo the snare layer. And then what I can do is I can just chop this, because I might just want the transient part. So it's just adding in some snap. Cool, and then we can just hear the whole break together with these added layers. Let's turn off Addictive Drums. That's without. Sounding good. Now just a reminder, we came from this. And we got this. Pretty good, eh? All right, so to progress this break further and modernize it, we've obviously layered in a kick and a snare, and then I wanted to add in some other hi-hats and percussive elements. So I've loaded in some other just general samples. Okay, and then we've just layered these across the top of the break. So to give you an impression of the difference that this makes, I'm just going to select these. I'm going to route them to their own channel. So we're going to create a new channel and we're going to label that. We're going to call this one hi-hat 2. Okay, and then we're going to fold that into the mix. And now we're really starting to build this break up into something that resembles a vibe suitable for DnB. All right, now the second method that you can use inside of Addictive Drums is just to build a kit that you like straight out of it. So we've got the original break that we used. Now, when we were working with it, we worked at the original tempo and we were auditioning it. We bounced it out, we pitched it up, we sliced it up, we threw it into a sampler and created the break that we just did. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to select a initial preset. So we'll go to all presets, we're going to go initial, and we want this to be empty, okay? So when we look at our kit, we're going to see that there's no hits inside of there. But remember that we do have the break here that we originally started with. However, it's going to be at 172, not 108. So the first thing we can do is start layering a kick in. And we can audition a kick sound that we like. All right, I'm going to use that one. Nice dead kick. Great, cool. Then we move on to our snare. Might go with that one. Yeah, I'm going to go with the snare. And then we want to select a hi-hat. Go with that 14-inch Sabian. Right, now before I start loading any other sounds into this kit, the first thing I want to do is I want to tweak them. So what we do is we come into the editor here, and first thing is to turn off the overheads and the room mics. So the overheads, they're 2 stereo mics. They capture the stereo image. They pick up your cymbals and stuff as well. And we want to turn that off, and we also want the room off because that's sort of like the natural reverb, okay? So coming into the kick drum, we can come into controls here. We'll solo the kick. Okay, and then the first thing we'll do is I'm going to shape this a bit. So I'm going to bring the release down, the sustain time. Make it short, and then I just add some release back in so I don't get that click. Okay, And then what I want to look at is the part here where it's got the response. So you've got this no alts here, which means no alterations. Same velocities can have different articulations of the drum hit. So if you're wanting to sort of zone in, you might want to select this here. And as we play the kick through, you move it over and you can start to get focused in. So I'm just going to leave it like that. And then you've also got this pitch envelope, and you also have a tone designer. So depending on what you're trying to achieve, you can affect tone. We can also work the pitch. Right, so if you're making DnB, you might want to pitch it up a little bit. It just depends on what you're trying to do. Okay, now let's move on to the snare drum. So we're going to isolate that. So the first thing I'm going to tighten it up. Try this tone. Got a nice little tone in there. Response. Okay, and then we'll move on to our hi-hat. So with the pitch envelope, you can change it. So you don't want anything that sounds weird and unnatural unless you're doing some weird sound design. I'm just going to put a little bit in there. Okay, and then we can hear these together. Okay, great. So we can hear straight away we've got some work to do with the sound. So the first thing I'm going to do with this hi-hat is I'm just going to do a cut. And I'm going to do the same with the snare. And the kick, I'm just going to roll a bit of it off from the bottom. Great. So now we can start looking at processing here. So we'll look at this kick. Okay, and then you see as I selected the effects section, obviously it brings up all of these options here. You've got the ability to add a noise and stuff like that as well. But the first thing I'm going to listen to is the mic placement. So we can select where the mic placement is in terms of bias, whether it's more leaning towards the beta mic or the front mic of the drum skin. So if we listen to how this changes the sound. So as you come through to the beta, it adds a bit more attack if that's what you're after for your sound. And towards the front makes it more boomy. It's going to lean it slightly towards the beta. Right, the next thing I'm going to do is going to add some compression. You've got this option here to push it as well, if you're looking for something more aggressive. Then we can add in some distortion as well. Now the great thing with this module is you've got the ability to focus the frequency range where that distortion or saturation is applied. So if we want to accentuate a certain range, we can, and then we can dial in that amount. We can obviously turn it all the way up to 11. I see what you did there, XLN Audio. Right, and then we can just adjust the mix and let that full body come through. Cool. Then we go to our EQ. Doing a little bit of a high cut there. All right, and then I'm just going to focus in around about 87 Hertz just to kind of capture that fundamental. And then boxy frequencies, just going to dip them out a little. If you wanted more air, you can add that in. And you can get more of the attack by coming up to these high frequencies. But I'm more sort of leaning towards that kind of pillowy, thuddy kind of kick these days is my kind of preference. Add some tape, bit of tape saturation, and you have the option to add some bottom in here so it beefs it up. We can then apply transient shaping. Cool. All right, so then we've got that. We'll move on to the snare. Now you notice straight away it's got this snare buzz. So when you listen to the kick and the snare together, what this is it's the snare drum buzzing with sympathy to the kick drum being hit. And if you're at a real drum kit, that's precisely what happens. It's really good that it's in here if you're going for something really natural sounding, but it's also good that you can control it and take it out, because depending on the genre, the sound that you're going for, having that control is really, really good. So I'll play the kick and the snare drum together, and I'm going to push this so you can hear what it does. So you hear when the kick hits, it gives that little shuffle. And then I take it out. Now the other thing is with the snare drum, we've got this same thing, mic placement, top and bottom. So we can hear the difference between the mic placement and the bias. So the bottom sounds more snappy because it's near where the snare is on the bottom, and you can see that part, like it's where it's rattling, so it kind of crisps up the snare. And I'm just going to lean it slightly towards the bottom. Now, I forgot to mention there's a noise module here if you want to apply, and there's different types. You've got noise, tube, DC noise, muff, stomp box, all these different modules you can use to add noise to the sound. So really good if you're wanting to do some like lo-fi type beat stuff, or you just want something to sound like all vinyl and crusty. Some compression. And some distortion. So straight away, that tone designer is bringing through those tones, overtones of the snare drum. So even though I like how it accentuates it, now I need to tame it a bit. And I think it's sitting around here. There it is. Right, so let's do a high cut. Accentuate the fundamental. And then do a little bit of a roll off. Add some tape. Transient shaping. Okay, and then our hi-hat. Now you'll notice the default setting, it's panning it slightly to the left. I'm going to bring it back to the center. I don't want any panning on my hi-hat for the purposes of what we're doing here. Might help if I actually make sure I've soloed my hi-hat. Some EQ. You can see all that bottom end, we don't need that. Mind you, depending on what kind of break you're making, if you're making something really, really stripped down, like super simple beat, like a straight two-step and like a very, very simple hi-hat pattern, because you're doing some kind of stripped back type of thing, you might actually want to leave low end in on your hat so it fills up the frequency space. That's something that I did with my track Totoro, which is a really, really simple beat. And so I actually left frequencies in because I wasn't filling it up too much. So that's something to bear in mind depending on what you're doing. Okay, and then I'm going to bring in the other elements. Okay, great. Now, the next thing to do is start bringing in these different mics, so the overheads and the room mic. Now, the first thing I want you to bring your attention to, if we just take the overheads, for example, and if you go to your selected kits, you've actually got levels that you can control into it. So if I solo the kick, I can actually take it out of the overheads if I don't want it in there. I can also adjust how much width there is, and I can also adjust panning as well if you're doing something interesting. But I don't want a bunch of width in my kick, for one, and I might not necessarily want a whole lot in my overheads. So we're going to look at that as well. I'm just going to quickly scan through the kick, snare, and hat. same principle for our room mic. Alright, and then we'll start blending these in. Alright, so then what we can do is we can select our overheads, we can isolate these, we can apply effects to them as well. Alright, and then I'm going to listen to it with the break. Right, and then we'll do the same thing with the room. You'll see we've got these distant controls here. Because if you think about it, a room mic is a natural reverb, right? So it's actually capturing the reverb of the room. So the distance is kind of like your decay, or the distance, the time that it takes for the sound to reach the mic from the source, which is the drums. Okay, so we're starting to dial that in. Now the next thing is we've got some send effects that we have the options of using. So if we go into here, we've got the FX1, FX2 called Delurb, I think it is, which is delay and reverb all in one go. And when you look at the send effects, we've got the option to click on it, we can engage it, and then on our individual hits we can select what we're sending to this effects. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at the snare and bring that through and put some reverb on it. Big decay, so I want to bring that down. And then I'm going to look at the different spaces. So I think I'll go the room. Then we've got EQ control. if you did want to use delay because you're getting weird, you have the ability to tempo link as well. Okay, can get pretty messy, but depending on the application and what you're up to, that's an option for you. All right, and then we might do a different setup with reverb, say for the hats. And then we've got a bus. Now all the kids like to jump on the bus when they're going to school. So what happens is with the bus here, you can select what you send through to the bus. So if we want to send everything, kick and snare and hat, whatever other elements you're using, you can send that through to the bus. And you might elect to do some sort of parallel processing. So like New York City style compression. And then blend it in. All right, so that's one way that you can approach to getting it. And then of course you might just want to create your own break out of the creation that you've made there. So very easy to do, just create a new MIDI lane, go through and start selecting the hits. And we can change how it sounds with the velocity. Okay, and then we're going to look at our snare. And we've got different articulations based on the note. Okay, and then we can start building a pattern. Okay, and we add a hat. And use the open. And you can do a choke. So we'll do an 8th pattern. Alright, and then we can come back into our kit here, and we might want to add something interesting, like something like a tambourine. Okay, somewhere up here. So we can grab a tambourine and we can start building a pattern with that. Just duplicate this out. Right, and then we want to tighten this up, and we can select a different type as well. We don't have to go with that particular one. Come back to the kit. This one here, I'm going to edit it, going to solo it. Change the pitch. So lots of different ways that we can go with this break here. Okay, so we've got that there. And then what we can then do is grab this, and we can either leave it as a single thing, or if you wanted to, you can bounce out the channels. Shouldn't say bounce, but separate out the channels post fader or pre fader. So basically pre fader means that there will be no level of adjustments if you've been making them inside of here, or post fader means that it's going to do the levels as you've mixed them inside of the plugin. But that allows you to then go and mix down the break inside of your DAW. So I'm going to close that break that we've made before. We're going to separate these out post. And then when we come to Addictive Drums, you'll see now we've got this folder. So I'm going to move this down just to keep things sort of organized of where we're working. And then we should be able to go into Addictive Drums, expand, and then we've got all of our different channels here. Flexi 1, overheads, room, and bus. Cool, so now we've got the ability to mix these all down. These are our effects. And if we wanted to, we could use our other kit to use those kick layers and snare layers underneath, but we will get to that. So the next thing you do is you come through and mix all of this down. So again, starting with the same process. So if I open up my previous kit, and I can probably steal a few processes from here. Need to turn this shaker down. Sorry, not shaker, tambourine. And then we'll drag over these effects onto the bus. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the pattern, copy it up to the other one. Don't need any of these hits. But what I do want is those kick drums, and then I'm going to move those up. Then I can copy that same snare pattern. And what I'd probably do is use shaper box on the snare to add some texture to it. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab some noise. I'm going to put it onto envelope mode. And then pick a noise that I might want to use with it. Maybe use a cassette. And then add some drive over it. And again, I'm going to put that in envelope as well. So we've got a cut change between two breaks now. Cool. So the other thing that I'd do to this is I'd bounce out here. I'm going to throw this through into another bus for the AD drums bus. And I'm going to abuse this thing a bit. Okay, so I'm going to use some analog plugins on the bus of this Addictive Drums to approach it and make it sound a bit spicier. So the first thing I'm going to use is this one here, the VBC FG-MU. Really nice analog coloring in this. That's bypassed. Right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in this virtual mix rack. And then I want to go look for Dynamix, and I want to go and find FG stress. So I'm going to give this a bit of compression punishment. That's sounding nice. Okay, and then I'm going to use Revival. I'm going to add some meat to it. And then I'm going to give it some processing, some console processing. So we'll grab this New York one. Nice. And then I'm going to bring down the levels with this trimmer. Slap that on there. Just a little slap and a tickle. Okay, final thing to do here. I want to do some clipping. And then we can hear it with the processing and without. Nice and lively. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a stereo bus. I'm going to record from my buses from the Addictive Drum bus, okay, as my source. Okay, and then I'm just going to hit record. Okay, and now I've got that break here. So now that we've got that break bounced out, we can go ahead and chop it. So this is where we've landed. And then I've sliced it up into this, which creates a really nice fill. So what I'm going to do then is I'm just going to add in the snare and kick layer. So I'm just going to quickly chop the kick and the snare from the MIDI notes, and I can just layer those over the hits. So we've got a kick and a snare, so I'm going to layer up my snares. And we'll layer up the kicks. And it'll start to sound like this. Sounding nice and beefy. All right, so we've come quite far with this. So if we mix it all up, we can start to have some really, really interesting fun with this. So I'm going to hide this part. I don't really need to play with Addictive Drums anymore. I've got everything that I need. But if we just look at here and phrase between these two parts, and we can cut those up. You know, you can obviously phrase and tighten this so that you shift between, here we are. So you could do something like this. So we'll grab this section, and then we're going to take this section. Okay, and that can create one of our phrases, and then we've got this section here, need a layer over the top, and we've got this whole section here. Get rid of that. Move these out. So if you want to do a track with a cut break kind of feel, we can do something like this. voila. That's how you can approach making drum and bass breaks with Addictive Drums 2 by XLN Audio. Two different approaches. First one, we obviously pitched the break, sliced it up, chopped it, processed it. The second one, we built it inside of Addictive Drums, channeled it out, mixed it, then we bounced it down, and then of course we can chop it up to our heart's content. I hope you found this to be inspiring and to give you some ideas to go and make some really, really sick breaks of your own. All right, let's hear what it sounds like with a sketch. Guys, I'm not trying to wow you here, but just gives you an idea of how these drums could work as you start fleshing out your idea. So let's give it a go. Rude.